So we're in Proverbs chapter 6 today. So how often have you said hindsight is 20/20, right? It's a phrase, a cliche we use a lot. And I think there's some truth in that. I don't know that it's exactly 20/20, but the idea is there's perfect vision in hindsight. When you look back on something, you say, oh, I should have done that much differently. And we've all said that and we've all experienced that. It got me thinking as I was reading this text this morning, or this week, not this morning. I certainly didn't prepare this morning. As I was looking at this text this week, if hindsight is 20/20, I thought, what is foresight? What is seeing into the future? What is that? What if I said that foresight is 20/20? You would probably say, please tell me more. If foresight is 20/20, I need to know what the future holds, and I need you to tell me that. I would say in many situations, foresight is 20/20. Now, not in all situations, but I would say in many situations, foresight is 20/20. I think it's a lot more clear than we may think. And we'll see that today, and thank God we have His Word that gives us foresight into what will happen if we exercise wisdom and in situations. But I look back, and I would think you do too, and I look back at decisions I made in my life, and I've said it often that hindsight is 20/20. I regret a lot of decisions. I wish that, I think there's one thing I can think of off the top of my head. I wish I would have realized Proverbs 18:21, that death and life are in the power of the tongue. And I think of my past mistakes I've made, and you rank them all, but I think there's been a lot of people I've probably hurt in the past that at this point, I can't take it back. I think of even people when I was in high school that I would pick on or whatever it is. And they could still be going through situations where you always remember those stories, and I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have understood that when I was a younger kid, that death and life are in the power of the tongue. That's just one of many. But we obviously learn a lot and experience a lot through hindsight. But one thing I've learned through hindsight is that foresight is valuable. I wish I would have made different choices in hindsight. And so obviously foresight is the knowledge of what will happen in the future. So when we talk about having and exercising foresight as believers, what we're talking about is prudence. Okay? The word prudence, it's basically, we talked about this week one, it's a family member of wisdom. It's very similar to wisdom. It's under the umbrella of wisdom. And so prudence is really, it's divine foresight. It is the ability to see what is ahead and make the right decision, knowing the end result. Foresight helps us to avoid pitfalls. It helps us to avoid danger. I think I said in week one, kind of a silly analogy, but this is true. It's brushing your teeth. Like when I brush my teeth every day, I don't think about it, but I'm exercising prudence. I'm brushing my teeth, knowing that if I don't brush my teeth, it's going to really damage my teeth, and it's going to put me in a lot of pain if I don't do that. So I'm exercising foresight. I'm exercising prudence. So the title of the sermon today is Prizing Prudence. We need to really value and prize prudence. And as I read through 6:1-19, which is our text today, when I read through it this week, we don't see the word prudence one time. We see it in Proverbs, but what you see throughout this text is prudence should have been exercised to avoid these pitfalls. And now, part of the purpose of Proverbs in chapter 1, we see it is to guide and give prudence to the simple, to the ignorant. We are all admittedly ignorant in many different areas of our lives. And therefore, we need prudence to exercise the right wisdom. So it's the ability to anticipate the future. So let's remember a key truth, though. God is omnipresent, and He is everywhere at all times. Therefore, He knows the future. So we need to listen to Him. We need to follow Him. Proverbs 15:13 says, the eyes of the Lord are in every place. So it would be very prudent and wise of us to take His word seriously, look at what we're called to do, look at the end result, and act accordingly. That would be very wise for us to do that. And thankfully, we have His word to show us the outcomes of situations. So today, and this will form our outline, we're going to see 4 areas that we need prudence in. Now, of course, this is not exhaustive. There are countless areas that we need prudence in. But today, as we're following the text, we're going to see 4 specific areas. And that, again, that forms your outline that you have. So number 1, we're going to see how we need prudence in our commitments that we make. The commitments, or we'll see specifically the agreements that we make with others. And we'll explain that. In our labor, prudence in our labor, how we work. Prudence in our relationships. And then prudence in our view of sin. Okay? So that'll form our outline today. Now I want you to remember, and I'll keep bringing this up. As Song of Solomon 2 says, it is the little foxes that destroy the vineyard. It is the little things in your life it's the little things in your life that can seem insignificant in the moment. So I'm going to keep coming back to this throughout the sermon, and I'm going to keep guarding you against that thought. Because some of these things we talk about, you may seem like it's not that big of a deal. When I think it's the little things that seem insignificant in the moment that actually cause greater harm in our lives. I want to get our church out of that mindset, if you are in that mindset. I want us to see all sin connecting together. I think that's important. All right? So let's read Proverbs 6, 1 through 19. It says, "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, have given your pledge for a stranger, if you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself. For you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares bread in the summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his fingers. With a perverted heart he devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers." Let's pray one more time. Father, as we read this text, we see how important that it is that we understand this and apply it to our lives. And so I pray your Spirit would be with us this morning, helping us to see the magnitude of your word today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I do find as I read this text, and if you continue to read forward in Proverbs, you'll see next week we come back to sexual sin. We talked about sexual sin last week, and we'll talk about it next week. I find it a little interesting that this text is sandwiched in the middle of those two. And I can't come up with a why of that. And in commentaries I consulted, couldn't come up with a why either. People guessed, and the best guess I heard was the author, Solomon, had so much to tell his child, he had to fit it in there somewhere. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know that God's way and his plan, and he is sovereign, is bigger than mine. So we're going to address this. We're going to see this in the middle of this big section on sexual sin. And so right in the middle, we see the importance of exercising prudence in specific situations. All right, so the first point is we need to exercise prudence in our commitments. Now that's general, and we'll see specifically what it's saying here is we need to exercise prudence in the agreements that we make with others. All right, so let me clarify a couple phrases. In verse 1, it says, "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor," well, what does that mean? What that's saying is that's promising to pay back a loan, to pay a loan for someone on their behalf. So it's with good intentions, but they were unable to do it. It's promising you'll pay back his loan, the person's loan, if they're unable to do it. And then in verses 2 and 3, it says, "If you've given your pledge, have come into the hand of your neighbor. All that's saying is you formalize the agreement. It's a handshake. And you're saying, I will do this for you. I will pay back your loan. I will commit to giving you whatever it takes to do this. So what the warning is here is against making a rash agreement. It's against rushing into an agreement. And so again, while you may have given the pledge with a good heart, it doesn't negate foolishness. That's a principle that I think we need to remember. Just because you have the right heart in something doesn't mean it's always wise to do something. So we need prudence and we need to exercise wisdom in that. Now, you may say, and this is why I'm trying to help us out here, I'm stepping back because I think it's speaking generally too. There are specific situations, but you may say, I've never done that. So Ryan, we can move on to the next point. That's not an issue for me. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've never promised someone that. But I would say we've all in this room made very poor, I'll say, financial decisions where we have committed to give someone money, and that's an agreement, that's a handshake, whether it's buying a house, whether it's buying a new car. It could even be, I want a new job so I can make more money and leave my old job thinking the grass is always greener. So we might have good intent behind these things. It doesn't mean we should do that. So there's been times where Megan and I have gotten into financial situations that's really difficult. We've shaken the hand, we've made the agreement, and it's like, what do we do with that? Okay, so I would say two things. The first implied step here is, this is implied, it doesn't say this, but we saw this last week, is never get into the situation in the first place. Just know that. That's very important. Remember last week we talked about sexual sin? It was, don't get into the situation in the first place. Run it and avoid it. It's the same here. Avoid it. Like running from the immoral woman. Never get into that situation. Now, the question though is, what if we do find ourselves in the situation? What if we have made a rash agreement? What do we do with that situation? This is something that's important for us to remember that I don't know that we've really addressed over the last 10 weeks here in this series. There's going to be times, unfortunately, where we all choose folly or foolishness over wisdom. That's what the series has come down to, those two choices. Unfortunately, we often will choose folly. The question is, what do we do when we choose folly? Because that will happen. It's inevitable. Well, we don't compound the mistake. Once we choose folly, then we exercise wisdom after that, right? So we're still called to exercise wisdom after we exercise folly. Remember that. It's basic, but we can forget that. So what do we do with that? Well, there's really two things we do. First, in verse 3 through 5, he says, then do this, my son, and save yourself. If you've come into the hand of your neighbor, go, hasten, plead urgently with your neighbor, give your eyes to no sleep and your eyelids no slumber. So he's saying, do it fast. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. A fowler is a bird catcher. So he's saying, very simply, do whatever you can to get out of the situation. Run and get out of the situation, if at all possible. Now, here's something that's important about exercising wisdom. It takes humility to be wise. There are times where we're going to make foolish decisions. And if I make a foolish decision, wisdom would tell me, Ryan, humble yourself and go make it right. Do everything you can to make it right. So what he's saying is, get out of it before it's too late. One commentary I read said what he's saying is swallow hard and eat your humble pie. Do you realize there's times that's wisdom? And there's times we've all been in that situation where we try to skirt around everything and make a million excuses when I should just say I was wrong. And we can justify our reasons. Sometimes we just need to eat our humble pie. Part of wisdom is humility. So that's step one. I don't need to explain that. So if you're in a situation like that and there is a way you can get out of it, you need to seek everything you can humbly to get out of that. I think though, and the text doesn't address this, but I will, I think the question could come of what if it's too late? I've been there, you guys have been there, where I've been in situations, and I think specifically financial situations where I'm like, I've already made the decision. I can't do this. Like I can't go run and get out of it. What do I do? What do I do in the middle of that when I made a poor decision? Be obedient during the midst of God's rebuke. Be obedient in the midst of rebuke. There's a text that I would encourage you just to write down. You don't have to turn here. That has always encouraged me and fascinated me. It's in Jeremiah 29, 4 through 7. And this is when the Israelites had been taken into exile by Babylon. There was a reason they were taken into exile. This was their punishment for rebellion against their Lord time and time again. Warning after warning after warning after warning. And finally, they were judged for that and they were punished for that. And so Babylon came and took them captive. And so Jeremiah, speaking on behalf of Israel, is saying, what do we do? We're in the middle of this land, this pagan land that hate God. What do we do with that? We've sinned. Our life is over. We've made poor decisions. And we got to lay in this bed, right? This is what God tells them. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. He's admitting it. I'm the one that sent you there. I'm the one that's punished you. But here's what I want you to do. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives for your sons and daughters. He says, marry. Give your daughters to marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and don't decrease. Continue to do what you're doing. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. How good is God? He's saying, despite the situation and the mess you've got yourself into, just start obeying again. Build houses, plant gardens, get married, have children, seek the welfare of the city. And you know what? I'm going to bless you. You may be in a situation right now, not sure what it could be, that's really, really difficult, and you don't know what to do. And I want to offer just a word of comfort, that God is rich in mercy. Believe that. You may be in a situation that it's just causing you depression. You're like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of it. God is rich in His mercy. He is slow to anger. Well, when you look at the Israelites, He was very slow, warning after warning after warning after warning. But He was so rich in mercy. So know that. Know He's rich in mercy. You may be in a situation. Recognize that it's not good. Don't do it again. Avoid it next time. But know that if you are in the situation, He is strong enough, and He is good enough, and He is powerful enough to get you out of the situation you got yourself into. So hear that this morning. So now I'm going to segue into the next 2 points, which I think are very relevant to our daily lives. I think these will be right in all of our wheelhouse here. We need prudence in our labor, in our work, whatever that work is that you do. Let's read 6 through 11. Go to the ant, O sluggard, and consider her ways, and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer, and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest? And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. It's clear that this section here is talking about laziness. We need prudence in our labor. So it's talking about laziness, and even specifically here, and I'm not going to make friends today, I don't think, it's talking about oversleeping, and it's talking about over-relaxation, which is obviously, it's a major struggle for Americans. It's a major struggle for us. I mean, clearly, that's what it's talking about. He's saying in verse 9, how long are you going to lay there? How long are you going to sleep? He says in verse 10, it's the compromise. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, no big deal. It's not a big deal. That's the American mentality, that laziness and oversleep is not a big deal. I would say it is. I would say it is. Once again, the little things, your oversleeping and your over-relaxation is connected to the bigger sins in your life, the bigger things that happen in your life. It's all connected. Here's where I'm concerned as a pastor and as the shepherd of this church. I think present ease is what most Americans think about because everything is easy for us, right? Generally speaking. Present ease is what we experience most, so it's what we think about the most. And that's what verse 10 is saying. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little relaxation, not a big deal. That's not a big deal. I think he's saying that it is a big deal. So oversleeping and over-relaxation is accepted in our culture, when biblically, it isn't. It isn't. The Bible actually rebukes it and groups oversleeping with laziness. All right? Now, I know what maybe a lot of you are thinking. Like, I do think there are anomalies. What I'm not saying is if you work hard, you can't take a nap. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. And look, if I had another hour, I might address 10 different scenarios. I literally don't have the time to address all the scenarios that could be going on in your head. So I'm offering you what Scripture says, generally speaking, and asking that you really pray through it. I'm certainly here to talk to you and help you and pray through things with you on this. I do recognize that there are anomalies. But I do think, and I'm pushing a little harder on this end because I think we struggle in our society with this a lot more than we do on the other hand. Most people I talk to, getting up is harder versus getting up earlier. It's just hard for us to do that, and I recognize that. Here's some questions to consider with laziness in general. You say, am I a lazy person? I don't know. We're all lazy to an extent. We all fall into these sins. We all do this. But is this something you really struggle with? Do you cut corners at your job when no one's looking? Do you cut corners? A lot of jobs nowadays have freedom. A lot of people work remotely, and there's just different ways that you can do this. Do you abuse that freedom in your job? Let me challenge the husbands and the dads here. Do you help out around the house? I mean, I understand how we work all day, right? We work really hard. We get to go home and just relax and sit on the couch. Here's maybe a bigger one. Maybe this is just a few in here, but there's obviously, I'm talking to everybody because a lot of you will have kids. Do you help out with the kids around the house? Do you actually, do you come home from work or get off of work and think, I'm tired. I've worked hard all day. I don't need help with the kids. I deserve my supper and I deserve to sit on the couch and watch a game. No, it's not what you deserve. When I've heard it before, when 5 o'clock hits or whenever it is you get off, the new day begins. And you work that much harder and you go to bed tired. We are called to help out around the house. We're called to help our wives out. I'm talking just to men here. We're called to help them out. Megan asked me this week, can I go shopping and leave the kids? Yes, I should watch the kids for her. And it shouldn't be a problem. I'm not nearly as good or effective as she is with it. And that's oftentimes why we try to weasel our way out of it. Because we're just not natural with that kind of stuff. We're not natural helping around the house. That's not the point. That's not the point. Oftentimes men are lazy here. Are you lazy with your eating habits? We don't think about these things. We just eat whatever. Lastly, do you regularly veg out and binge watch or scroll social media nonstop? Or sports, fantasy football, things that cause you to get hooked. And do you get hooked on those things? All that and many other things are just personal applications to consider. Is this me? And that needs to be changed. Now, maybe you're saying, is it that big a deal? Like, I get what you were saying last week, Ryan, about how sexual sin can ruin you, and I've experienced that, and I know that. This just isn't that big a deal, is it? Like, these are smaller sins. That's fair. Well, let's look at verse 11. If this is how you are, this is what could happen. Poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man. Now, recognize Proverbs is not promises. That doesn't mean that it will happen, but it means it very well can happen. If you are a lazy person, it can catch up to you. And you could fall into poverty very easily. That's just what verse 11 says. So it produces poverty. Proverbs 20:13 says, love not sleep, lest you come to poverty. So we come back to the oversleeping. You're saying, Ryan, you're not convincing. Well, 20:13 says, don't love sleep, lest you come into poverty. So it produces poverty. It produces dissatisfaction. Laziness produces dissatisfaction. Proverbs 13:4 says, the soul of a lazy person craves and gets nothing. I found that interesting. The lazy person actually craves and desires, yet they don't get what they desire. Charles Bridges says, the sluggard, which is a lazy person, craves the fruit of diligence without the diligence that gains it. So the sluggard, the lazy person, wants what the diligent person has, but they won't act diligently or live diligently to actually get that. That's what 13:4 is saying. Laziness ruins us. Proverbs 21:25, the desire of a sluggard kills him. Again, the point of this is I'm trying to give you, it's not just one text that says this. This is throughout the book of Proverbs. I found this one interesting. It's the last one. Talking about with your jobs. Laziness causes frustration in others. It's an interesting verse. Proverbs 10:26. Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to those who send him. The idea is in the workplace, but it could be anywhere. You're asking someone to do a task, and they don't get done, and it's like vinegar to the teeth. It's hard to taste it. It's hard to digest it. It's a problem. So know that when we are cutting corners and we're acting in these ways, it's hard for those that are sending you out. The Amazon guy. The Amazon guy. I noticed when we were singing, I was like, the blinds are open today. I was like, I probably need to shut those. I'm like, no, it'll be all right. We'll give it a shot. And sure enough, the Amazon guy goes by. So we'll get back on track. The idea, the complacent attitude is destructive. Now, let's contrast that. This is important. Contrast that with Ecclesiastes 5:12. And it says, sweet is the sleep of a laborer. Sleep is a good thing. Don't hear me say don't rest. You need to rest. You need to sleep. But it's sweet for the laborer. Colossians 1:29, Paul says, for this I toil, struggling with all his energy, that he powerfully works in me. He says, I labor to the point of exhaustion. People say, what's the balance in my work? I don't know there's an exact formula, but I would say you work to the point of exhaustion and trust God will give you the energy. Now, here's what's key, though. We work to the point of exhaustion in the right areas. For example, that doesn't mean I can labor to the point of exhaustion and sermon prep for 24/7 and neglect my family duties. That would be poor laboring. So I labor to the point of exhaustion in the areas He's given me. So I work really hard throughout the day, and I do everything I can to get off at a decent time, and then labor in the evenings with my family, generally speaking. Some weeks are different. But generally speaking, that is what we do. We labor to the point of exhaustion in the right areas. But if I am abusing my job at the expense of my family, that's not good labor. That's not good exhaustion. It's exhaustion in the right areas. As a pastor, but as a husband and dad. Now, I think verse 6 through 8 gives some significant wisdom to us. We prayed over this back in the summer at a prayer meeting. He says, consider the ant. Not just look at the ant, consider the ant. Consider her ways and be wise. What do you think consider means? It means think about it. Think about the ant. It's amazing that we have to receive our lessons from little creatures that we step on, and we don't think about it. Consider them. Some things in the Bible need deeper explanations. Some don't. And this one doesn't. Consider the ant. The ant doesn't need accountability. I said this last week. I'll say it again. I think we're too dependent on accountability. I think we need accountability. I think it's very important, and I think it's very helpful. But I think we're way too dependent, because Proverbs says she has no chief officer or ruler, yet she prepares her bread in the summer and gathers her food in harvest. The ant doesn't even have a ruler, and she does it anyways. Why? How? How does she do it? She acts prudently, and she knows what? That winter is coming. I know winter's coming. I better act wisely and prepare for winter. That is why knowing outcomes really aid and help in our desire to obey. So we've got to act prudently, knowing that doom is waiting for us if we're lazy, but joy is waiting for us if we're obedient. That's how we act like the ant. The ant knows what's coming. We should know joy is there. Think about Jesus in Hebrews 12. For the joy set before him, what did he do? He endured the cross. He saw joy on the other side and he said, but I've got to endure the cross for joy on the other side. It's worth it. All right, prudence in our relationships. And these verses are pretty obvious. Verse 12 through 15. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment, he will be broken beyond healing. So two things that we learn about sowers, or there's multiple things we learn about sowers of discord or those with crooked speech. It's pretty obvious what this means, but if you're not aware, a sower of discord or someone with crooked speech is one, what that's saying is they spread seeds of dissension. So a lot of gossip, a lot of slander, that kind of thing. What we see in verse 12 is these people are wicked. It says their sin will destroy them in verse 15, kind of like laziness. We just talked about that. And if you read ahead in verse 19, it says that God hates these kind of people. So this is a serious thing. The verse that always stands out to me here with sowers of discord, and we know this issue runs rampant in the church. I mean, this is what you do, right? In the Southern Baptist life. You hear the sermon and you go home and you talk about the sermon negatively or whatever it may be, or you talk about the person that you came in contact with and that didn't smile or whatever it may be. You pick apart the church. And unfortunately that happens. 2 Timothy 2:17 has always been a passage that's really stood out to me, where it talks about how these two men in the church named Hymenaeus and Philetus were gossiping and spreading the seeds of dissension. And it says their speech spreads like cancer. And it's a virus that's deadly, and it goes throughout the whole church. What's amazing to me about that verse is it was only two men. That shows the seriousness of slander and gossip in the church. It doesn't take half the church. It takes one person telling another person that tells another person. We've got to guard against that. We have to guard against that. Why would we want to identify with this person that's wicked, that their sin will destroy them, and the sin that is hated by God? Why would we want to identify with this person? Consider these Proverbs. Proverbs 16:28. A dishonest man spreads strife, okay? And a whisperer separates close friends. I don't know that I'm telling you guys anything you don't know, but I think it's important to remember that sowing discord is so powerful that it can separate the closest of friends. We've probably all in here somewhat experienced that. You had a best friend at one point that said something bad about you, and it just kind of damaged the relationship, and it's just unfortunate. It shows you how strong the tongue is. As I said earlier, death and life are in the power of the tongue, Proverbs 18. Here's one to consider. We'll go a little more in detail. Proverbs 17:9. Whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends. So it says whoever covers an offense seeks love. Here is where our default should be as Christians. Stop nitpicking every single offense. We're human. We're going to sin. We're going to do things we shouldn't do. But if we're picking apart literally everything, that's a problem. So what we do is we nitpick all this stuff, and then what we do is we go repeat all this stuff, and it spreads dissension in relationships. Look, we understand there's times that other people need to get involved. There is a pattern that we follow in Matthew 18. If these things happen, it's not saying you overlook every tiny thing. But the idea in short there is when it happens again and again and again and again and again and again, there are times where we do need to do something about it. And we need to maybe go to someone else. But generally speaking, we should overlook offenses. And that's giving the benefit of the doubt is maybe the way that we would say that. All right? But most of the times, I think sin should be covered. Now, let's contrast discord with encouragement. Proverbs 16:24. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the body and the soul, and health to the body. When I encourage, or when you encourage, that brings health to the body. Proverbs 12:25. This one I like better. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. Have you ever been encouraged by someone, specific encouragement, and you thought about it all week? I mean, we have. Like I've been given compliments before that have carried me to the next sermon, honestly. It really has, because I've gotten compliments and encouragement. It keeps me going. But if I never get encouragement, then you get anxiety. It weighs you down, and it weighs you down, and it weighs you down. And just one good word can cheer you up. That shows the importance of encouragement versus discord. It's very powerful. Now, I'm not talking about flattery, where I'm not asking, come compliment me. I'm talking about throughout everyone. We shouldn't flatter one another, but we should really seek to encourage one another. Okay, lastly, prudence in our view of sin, verse 16 through 19. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Let me say too, and I didn't put this in my notes, and I just realized I probably need to say this, and it could be very obvious. Notice in verse 15, calamity will come upon that person. Again, it's very important that we see the little sins, quote unquote, actually lead to these bigger situations. I wanted to, again, point that out. So prudence in our view of sin, verse 16 through 19. What I mean by this is seeing our sin as God sees it. And when you see there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him, this is really just a literary device in Hebrew writing. So what he's saying, this is very common in Hebrew writing to write this way. Basically what he's saying is these 6 things lead to a 7th thing. So these 6 things lead to a sower of discord, okay? So what's interesting too in this text is God hates all sin. We know God hates all sin, but there are apparently certain sins that God hates more than others. That's what we see. He hates them in a special manner. And here are those sins. Haughty eyes. That means pride, being prideful. And pride is the root of all sin. It's putting myself above God, doing what I think I should do. Lying tongue, because truth matters. Shedding innocent blood. That's because they're doing the devil's work there. Devising wicked plans. Knowingly doing something. Scheming. Consider, even last week with sexual sin, this is one where you see this a lot. You say, I've never devised a wicked plan. Have you devised a wicked plan to view something on the internet? An elaborate scheme to hide it from someone? That's what that is. Feet running to evil. Eagerness to pursue sinful things. A false witness, one who swears before others that something untrue is true. Lastly, a sower of discord. Here's the point I think we need to get here in the time we have remaining. We need to see that sin is not a light thing. Do you realize? Let's just take the first 2. You have all been prideful, as have I, and I have lied. God hates, that's the word. This whole thing about God doesn't hate, He does. Now, He doesn't hate the way we might think hate is, but He hates those sins. And that's what we need to see, that your compromising is not a light thing. Do you realize that the light, quote-unquote, sin of eating from the tree condemned the whole human race? That's a light sin, right? Wasn't a big deal. They just ate the fruit. They just listened to Satan. They didn't murder anybody. They didn't do anything bad. It was a light sin that condemns the whole human race. We've got to see that. So our little sins of prideful thoughts, inactivity, lying, and gossip are sins that God hates. I want you to consider 2 Samuel 12:9. When David sinned against the Lord, Bathsheba, when he committed adultery, you know what God said? Or Nathan the prophet said it to him? Why have you despised the word of the Lord and done evil in his sight? When we sin, we're despising God's word. I'm going to end with a quote from Isaac Ambrose, who's a Puritan, to maybe bring this full circle. He says, Christians, would not your hearts rise against him that should kill your father, mother, brother, wife, husband, those of closest relation? He's saying, if someone killed a close family member of yours, that would certainly, your heart would rise within you, and you would have a major problem with that, as you should. Then he says, oh then, how should your hearts and souls rise against sin? Surely your sin it was that murdered Christ, that killed him, who is 1,000 times dearer to you. Should we not despise and hate our sin because it put our Father on the cross? You would hate someone that would murder your family. How much should we hate our sin who put Christ on the cross, who is 1,000 times dearer to you? Now I'm going to transition into communion, but I want you to pay attention here. And I believe I said I wrote it down, yeah. Quinn and Josh will pass that out. This is where the text ends. And it doesn't end with anything happy and merry. And as I teach the word, I'm going to end where the text ends. I think that's the wise way to do it. But I want you to consider something. You may be saying right now, I feel beaten down. Maybe the better word was rebuke. Maybe you're saying, man, we're going through Proverbs and it's one warning after another. And Ryan, it's been 10 weeks of I'm failing in every single one of these areas. Can I tell you that is actually the point? The point is that you're supposed to see that you're a failure in everything. That's true. You are to know that I can't do anything good. And I cannot rely on my own strength. That is the point. That's when you start seeing that life is impossible in your own strength. When you keep trying to do it Ryan's way, or Matt's way, or Suzanne's way. That's the point. It's so big. And what happens is we start looking to the cross. The sin is too great for me. It's too much. It's too hard. I need someone to save me. I need a better way. And that is the way of Christ. So I think feeling beat down is actually, you probably heard your whole life in the church that that's bad. It's actually not bad. It's bad if there's no hope offered. That's the point. If it ends there, it's terrible news. If that's where it ends. But the good news is you have hope. And you have Christ, who in 1 John 2, what does John say? I'm writing these things to you so that you don't sin. The whole book of 1 John is so that you don't sin. But you know what he says right after that? But if anyone does sin, because we will sin, what does he have with him? An advocate. We have Christ who came and lived the perfect life on my behalf. I was a sower of discord, and I still will sow discord, unfortunately. I still fall into it. And I need Christ being sin for me. I need sowing discord for me. I need punishment for that, but Christ took that punishment for me. He is your advocate. That is Christ pleading with the Father that Ryan's perfect because I've covered him. Now, it's a lawyer term. It's a defense lawyer on your side. He advocates for me every time I sin. That is sweet, and that is why we run to Jesus. So I'm going to pray for us.